Today I want to evaluate your knowledge of anatomy and physiology concepts and medical terminology. And so this is common terminology that you'll see in the medical field and in anatomy and physiology, whether it's from an administrative standpoint and you're abstracting data from a patient's chart for billing and coding purposes, whether it's a clinician who is going to be looking at information in a patient's chart. All of this is going to be important information to have a strong working knowledge of when you are in the medical field. So this is just some random sources that I've pulled, and one in particular, like I said, just going to skip over some things. These are from some old tests that I've accumulated. But one of the things that I want to talk about are hormones, and our hormones are part of the endocrine system. And the endocrine system is going to be a series of glands, and the combining form for gland is adeno. And adeno, again, means gland, and we have various glands that are associated with the endocrine system. The pituitary gland, which is the master gland. We have the adrenal glands, which sit on top of each kidney. We have the thyroid gland, the parathyroid glands on top of the thyroid gland. All of these glands are going to secrete hormones. Hormones are going to be important because hormones are going to be specific to the cells which they are going to be attracted to and cause some sort of a physiological change. Also, they are going to be important because the changes that they bring about are going to be slow to occur and typically long lasting. So an example might be growth hormone. Growth hormone gets secreted by the pituitary gland. Growth hormone is going to have a significant increase on the growth of long bones. So long bones, okay, and this is the epiphysis at each end of the long bone, proximal epiphysis, distal epiphysis. Okay, this is the shaft or the diaphysis of the bone. It's covered in articular cartilage on each end, on each epiphysis, to make it smoothly move over another bone. So this is a long bone, and growth hormone is going to cause this long bone to grow longer and larger during our formative years. Now, why is a hormone that gets secreted into the bloodstream and ultimately has access to every cell in our body, why doesn't it cause other structures to grow longer? Why doesn't growth hormone, for example, cause our nose to grow longer? After all, hormones get secreted into the bloodstream. And of course, the bloodstream carries oxygen and nutrients and picks up the waste products from every cell in our body. So why wouldn't hormones that come into contact with every cell in the body have the same effect on every cell? Okay, well, the reason is because of the lock and key model. Okay, every lock has a specific key that will fit it. Think of the bones as having a specific lock that growth hormone can unlock. Okay? Now, on the other hand, if we were talking about a structure like someone's nose, growth hormone doesn't possess the key to unlock the cells of the tissue in the nose that would potentially cause it to grow longer. So hormones work in a lock and key method. Okay, a specific hormone may come in contact with a cell, but unless that cell is capable of receiving that particular hormone and benefiting from it, then it won't open up the ability for that hormone to get inside the cell and cause some sort of a physiological change. Now, we have other hormones that are, vastly important in our physiological makeup as well. For example, the hormone cortisol. Cortisol is a hormone which helps our body deal with stress. Okay, cortisol gets released by the adrenal glands that sit on top of the kidneys. Okay, we have other hormones like parathyroid hormone. That's going to be vitally important in maintaining calcium balance in our body. Epinephrine also is released from the adrenal glands. Epinephrine gives us the ability to have the fight or flight function kick in. If we need to run farther or punch harder or whatever it takes for our system to survive, epinephrine is going to be important in preserving our life. Oxytocin. Oxytocin is going to be a very important hormone, especially for females during pregnancy. Oxytocin is what's going to actually stimulate uterine contractions, thus promoting the ability of the child to be delivered. As a matter of fact, if a female needs to be induced, they give them a synthetic version of oxytocin called Pitocin to help them speed up the process of delivery. Okay, and then we also have hormones like aldosterone. Aldosterone is going to be vitally important for our body to help maintain sodium and electrolyte balance, and that in turn maintains fluid balance. So all of these are hormones that our body produces on a regular basis, and all of them are going to be important in that they do come into contact with every cell in our body, but ultimately only the proper cells that can utilize them will be affected by the hormone. Well, when does our body know that some crucial point has been achieved and therefore it must have some sort of a reaction to keep our body within a very stable means where it operates at optimal levels? Well, we call operating at optimal levels in the body homeostasis. Homeostasis is going to be a very narrow range in which our body functions. For example, the homeostatic set point of pH of our blood is 7.35 to 7.45. If the blood varies beyond that, well then there are circumstances associated with that. Our body generally has, as a male, 5 to 6 liters of blood. A female has about 4 to 5 liters. If for some reason the body has more overall blood volume, that's going to cause greater amounts of filtration at the levels of the kidney to ultimately decrease blood volume, allowing the body to maintain that homeostatic set point of 5 to 6 liters of blood for a male, 4 to 5 liters of blood for a female. Well, in many cases, we are going to see that our body is driven by gradients, concentration gradients as they are called. And so to maintain homeostasis, if we have something that is in high amounts in our body, it is going to seek to go to an area of lower amount of that same product, okay, till ultimately both areas have the same amount, okay, and we would refer to that as equilibrium. Well, the process of moving something from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, that's called diffusion. Diffusion is going to move whatever it may be, Okay, maybe it's blood glucose that's in high concentration in the blood sugar, and now it's going to move excess amounts of blood sugar into the muscles, or extra blood sugar into the liver where it's stored as glycogen. So ultimately, movement of something from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, we call that diffusion. Now, there's a special type of diffusion called osmosis, in which water moves from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. For example, if somebody is given a laxative to increase bowel movements, well, what ends up happening is water from other areas of the body moves from areas of higher water concentration into the large intestine, an area of lower water concentration, and that leads to more material in the large intestine, thus producing a bowel movement. So osmosis is going to be a special type of diffusion where water moves from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Well, continuing with our body's ability to maintain homeostasis and how hormones play a role in our body, we talked about how growth hormone secreted by the pituitary gland is going to create changes in the length of long bones. And these long bones grow during formative years of our development, and it leads to an increase in height. Well, our skeletal structure is going to be divided into two divisions, the axial skeleton and the appendicular. The axial skeleton is going to consist of the cranium, rib cage, and the vertebral column. The axial skeleton, priority one, is to protect. The cranium protects the brain. The rib cage protects the heart and lungs. The vertebral column protects the delicate spinal cord. So priority one for the axial skeleton is protection. But beyond that, it gives our appendicular skeleton something to hang from. So the appendicular skeleton is going to consist of the clavicles, and scapula, and then that's going to be what's called our shoulder girdle, and then in our lower body, the pelvic bones, or they may be called the os coxa. Os meaning bone, coxa meaning hip. So our clavicles and scapula are going to attach to the axial skeleton, okay, in the shoulder region. The pelvic bones are going to attach at the bottom part of the axial skeleton's vertebral column at the sacrum, and ultimately then the humerus and the upper arms, as well as the bones of the wrists, the hand, and the fingers, the phalanges, all attached to the clavicle and scapula. The pelvic bones are going to have the leg bones attached. The femur, the patella, the tibia, the fibula, the bones of the foot, the metatarsal bones, the bones of the toes, the phalanges. So the axial skeleton is going to be there for us to protect. It's going to give us something to hang the clavicles and the scapula from, as well as hang the pelvic bones from, and then our arms and legs will attach to the axial skeleton. The appendicular skeleton gives us the ability to move in various planes. Okay, so for example, if we do this particular movement, okay, flexion, okay, that might be bringing up a bottle of water towards your mouth so you can get a drink. An extension, where the arms do just the opposite. They go back to their normal resting length. Okay, and then we have movement away from the vertebral column, away from the body's midline. Okay, that's called abduction. Back toward the body's midline, adduction. Okay, if we have our hand move up like this, this is called supination. With the palm up, you could put soup in your hand. That's how you remember it's supination. When our hand goes back to its normal resting position, our skeleton in anatomical position, we then say it's in a prone position, or it's been pronated. Movement of our foot inward, okay? If this is my foot, okay, and we move it inward, okay, this is called inversion. If we move it outward, eversion. Okay, so if you move the foot inward, inversion. If you move it away from the body's midline, moving the sole of the foot away from the midline, that's called eversion. So those are some of the abilities that our skeleton gives us. It gives us protection through the axial skeleton. It gives us something to hang our appendages from. Our appendages are the shoulder girdle bones, the pelvic bones, and then the arms and legs. But the skeleton, of course, gives us a place to store calcium. Okay, calcium is vital for not only bone density, but also calcium is necessary for muscle contraction. The heart needs calcium, for example, to contract. So do all the skeletal muscles. So do the smooth muscles in our gastrointestinal system. All of them need calcium. And so the skeletal system serves as a reserve for calcium. It also, when the muscles contract and the muscles cross over a joint utilizing a tendon, that produces the movements that we just saw: flexion, extension, adduction, abduction, inversion, eversion, pronation, supination. Those are just a few of the movements that are allowed by the skeleton as our skeletal muscles give us the ability to move. Now, our skeleton is going to be composed of 206 bones in the adult, but infants have more bones. Adults actually have a lot of bones which fuse together into one bone. Okay, for example, the bones of the sacrum, the bones of the coccyx. Okay, the bones that form our skull all have suture lines where they have come together, whereas in the developing neonate, newborn, they are going to be called fontanelles. Those are the soft spots in the baby's skull. Well, those 206 bones in our skeleton can be divided into short bones, long bones. Those are the ones that we typically think of, and I drew an example of a long bone up there a minute ago. Irregular bones, okay. Flat bones, whoops, sesamoid bones like the patella that have a sesame seed shape and also grow in an actual tendon. So short bones have somewhat of a cube shape. Okay, bones of the wrist might be an example of a short bone. Bones that make up the ankle would be an example of a short bone. Long bones would be like the bone I drew before, for example, the femur, that has a proximal and distal epiphysis, a diaphysis, and it's going to come into contact with another long bone and ultimately produce movement. We have flat bones. I'm going to skip irregular for just 1 second. We have flat bones, bones that, for example, make up our skull. Those are flat bones. They're not flat as a pancake, but generally speaking, they are turned up on the ends. So bones of our skull, okay, for example, the frontal bone, the temporal bone, the parietal bone, those are all going to be flat bones. Our ribs are considered a flat bone. The clavicles are considered a flat bone. And then again, an example of a sesamoid bone is the patella, our kneecap. Well, irregular bones simply have a shape that is so unique to them that there's no other way to classify them. So an example of an irregular bone might be a bone of the vertebral column, a vertebrae. And vertebrae would have processes that move away from the central portion of the bone, and they have a hollow central point, and in this case, that is where the spinal cord would be found. So irregular bones have a unique shape. Our bones in the inner ear, okay, the auditory ossicles, those too are going to be considered as irregular bones. The ossicles are so small that all three of the ossicles could fit on a dime. The malleus, the incus, and the stapes are so small that the three of them together could fit on a dime. Okay, that's just how small they are. And they're going to be important for our ability to hear. That's called bone conduction. Okay, so that's yet another way that our skeletal system helps our body out. In this case, with bone conduction, a special sense that gives us auditory sensation or the ability to hear. The auditory ossicles are going to be found, if this is the pinna, also called the auricle, in other words, our outer ear. Okay. This is the auditory tube, okay, or the auditory canal, and it leads to a structure called the tympanic membrane, okay, the eardrum. And the eardrum is going to be kind of taut. It's going to be a membrane that's taut like the head on a snare drum. And so when sound waves get focused by the outer ear, okay, and that outer ear focuses those sound waves down the auditory canal to the tympanic membrane, it literally beats a tune on that drum head. That is the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane is then going to have those three tiny auditory ossicles, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. And the malleus is going to come right into contact with the tympanic membrane. And malleus literally means mallet. And so that mallet is then in turn going to pound on the incus, which means anvil, and then the incus pulls on a small structure called the stapes. So the malleus is right up against the tympanic membrane. It hammers on the incus. The incus is attached to the stapes. The stapes is going to be in contact with the inner ear at a point called the oval window. And inside that oval window will be a fluid, and what happens is that bone conduction causes ripples in that fluid that gets picked up by the cochlear nerve, and the cochlear nerve transmits that stimulation back to the temporal lobe of the brain, and that in turn gives us the perception of sound. If our body's never heard a particular noise before, it's not going to have a database of information that makes that noise. But on the other hand, if we've heard a jackhammer hitting a road plate in our past, and somewhere we made the connotation that that noise equals a man standing with a jackhammer hitting it on a road plate during road construction, that gets entered into the database in our temporal lobe that helps us with auditory sensation, and we would recognize that noise even if we're a long distance away from the man with the jackhammer hitting it on a road plate. But on the other hand, if it was somebody who had just gained their ability to hear through a cochlear transplant or cochlear implantation, then they would have to go through life for some period of time building up their database of information. Okay, but all of this ultimately ties back into our skeleton, and as we mentioned, the skeleton is going to be divided into the appendicular skeleton and the axial skeleton. The axial skeleton gives us protection. It gives us something to attach our appendages to. The appendicular skeleton is what ultimately provides our body's ability to move. And finally, calcium is going to be stored in our skeleton, and we mentioned before that a hormone like parathyroid hormone helps regulate calcium storage in the skeletal system. Calcitonin also regulates calcium storage in the skeletal system. Hormones like growth hormone play an important role in the development of the skeletal system during our formative years when we are growing. So all of this is tied into our skeletal system, okay? And we have to think of it as being living tissue that is very vascular. Okay, skeletal bones all have rich vascularity because the skeleton is constantly remodeling. It also has nerves. It's not just dead material. It is sensitive to changes around it in terms of twist being applied to the bones. If somebody's exercising in the gym, the bones get stronger because those nerves get distorted, and that leads to more and more bone mass being laid down. The bones are also going to be responsible for creating blood cells. Red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, all are formed in the red bone marrow of our skeletal system. Red blood cells, of course, transport oxygen and carry away the waste material, carbon dioxide. That's a gas that's formed during cellular metabolism. White blood cells formed in the red bone marrow are going to be important for protecting us against foreign pathogens. They are vital to our immunity. Platelets or thrombocytes are going to be important for helping our blood to clot if we get injured. So all of those go back to the skeletal system, functions of the skeletal system, and how hormones play an important role in our skeletal system, and also how the hormones, though they may be in the bloodstream and come into contact with all the cells of the body, they still, because of the lock and key model that we talked, have to be able to ultimately unlock a cell to gain entrance and change that cell in some physiologic facet. Okay, so this is a brief overview of some key concepts associated with medical terminology and A&P, and we'll continue our study of this material.